There are those who simply hold a title. But then, there are those who shape an entire nation. When we speak of American history, we don't just recall wars or crises or victories. We remember the moments when the fate of a people hung on just one single decision, a signature, a speech, a refusal to seize power, or a call to sacrifice. For over 250 years, 46 presidents have walked into the White House, but only a very few, rose beyond leadership and became legends. They didn't just hold the country together when storms raged. They redefined the soul of America in ways the world would never forget. Who were they? The one who gave up a throne to preserve the Republic, the one who held a nation together as it tore itself apart, the one who quietly built the roads, the systems, and the values we still live by today. In this video, you won't just hear the names of the 5 greatest US presidents. You'll be led into their world, into the pressure, the fear, the sleepless nights, where they stood at the line between right and wrong, between tradition and change, between collapse and rebirth. And you'll come to see, greatness isn't found in power alone. It's found in how you use it, for something greater than yourself. This is the top 5 greatest presidents in American history, and this is what made them legends. He wasn't a king, but they called him the father of a nation. Throughout human history, power is almost never surrendered. When a man holds the military, the people, and the hearts of millions, he keeps it until his last breath. But George Washington, he walked away. He wasn't the best speaker, not a brilliant scholar, didn't write the Constitution, didn't invent anything, didn't lead with ideology, but he did one thing no one before him ever dared. He defeated an empire, then stepped down in silence. Born in 1732 to a Virginia plantation family, Washington never dreamed of politics. He wanted to be a sailor, but destiny had other plans. When war broke out against the British, he was made commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. At the time, the American troops were nothing more than farmers with guns. No supplies, no money, no discipline. Their opponent, one of the most powerful military forces on earth, the British Empire. Washington lost many battles, retreated often, but he never lost hope, never lost his men, never lost faith. That freedom must be taken, not asked for. And after nearly a decade of war, America won, and Washington was offered a throne. This was the moment history held its breath. Would he seize power? Would he crown himself president for life? No. He stepped down, returned to his farm, and said, "The nation doesn't need a general anymore. It needs a constitution." In 1789, he was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States, the only president to ever receive 100% of the electoral vote. But Washington didn't embrace power. He respected it. He kept his distance. In office, he, last, refused to rule like a king, built the first cabinet. Hamilton, Jefferson, others stayed neutral in Europe's wars, despite massive pressure, set limits on his own authority. No laws, no decrees, no ego. When rebellion broke out over a whiskey tax, Washington didn't send a letter. He mounted a horse, led troops himself, not to crush, but to show. This new government will enforce law, but never forget its principles. Then came his greatest decision, the end of his second term. The people wanted more. Congress begged him to stay. There were no term limits. He could have ruled for life, become King George I, but again, he said no. And by doing so, he saved the Republic for a second time. He didn't leave behind grand speeches. He left behind an example, a man who conquered power by walking away from it. Washington could have ruled America by force, but he chose to rule it with humility, and that is why he stands as the greatest president in U.S. history. He didn't shout, he didn't boast, he simply built America. His name was Dwight David Eisenhower, but Americans called him Ike, a soldier, a supreme commander, and eventually the 34th President of the United States. 1944, the night before D-Day, the largest military invasion in human history. Eisenhower didn't sleep. He didn't hide behind a desk. He didn't bunker down. He walked among the troops, shook their hands, looked them in the eyes, and said, "If anyone fails this mission, it's me." And when the war ended, a new war began. A war not of bullets, but of ideas, of order or chaos. 1952. The Cold War was rising. Korea was burning, and the American people chose him, not for speeches, not for charisma, but for something rarer, trust. And he delivered. While others debated, Eisenhower built. He signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, and from that was born the interstate highway system, over 65,000 kilometers of road, connecting all of America, not just concrete and asphalt. It was a backbone, a lifeline, a unifying force for farms, cities, mountains, plains. But Eisenhower didn't stop at the ground. 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. The world panicked, but Eisenhower stayed calm. He didn't rant. He didn't blame. He acted. He created NASA and launched a secret agency called ARPA, which would one day become the Internet. He was a builder, but also a defender of principles. 1957. 9 black students were blocked from entering a school in Little Rock, Arkansas. The Supreme Court had ruled, but the state refused to comply. Eisenhower sent in the federal troops. The law is the law. If states will not uphold it, then the federal government must. It was the first time since the Civil War that the army was used to enforce civil rights, and he didn't flinch. He also did the unexpected. He expanded the social programs from Roosevelt's New Deal, giving more Americans access to education, housing, and health care. Under Eisenhower, the middle class boomed, the economy soared, and the United States became a true superpower. Was he perfect? No. He hesitated on civil rights. He placed missiles too close to Russia, actions that would help ignite the Cuban Missile Crisis. But through it all, he never lost sight of the greater mission, to build an America that could endure, not through force, but through trust, infrastructure, and justice. 1961. When Eisenhower left office, America had changed. The roads ran longer, the dreams ran farther. The vision of what a nation could be ran deeper. Eisenhower didn't ask for grand sacrifices. He simply built a country where people could dream, move, and never be left behind. And he didn't just save a country, he saved its humanity. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, America was no longer a united nation. It was a ticking time bomb. Cracks had formed from slavery, partisan politics, and the growing divide between North and South. And Lincoln, a man born in poverty, self-taught, who became a lawyer, a congressman, was the one destiny called at that exact moment. But it was also his victory. That led to 7 southern states immediately breaking away from the Union. They declared independence. They formed the Confederate States of America. And like the spark that ignites dry grass, civil war began. April 12th, 1861. War officially erupted at Fort Sumter. The South fired first. The North responded. No one knew. This war would last 4 years, take more than 600,000 lives, and rip apart the very soul of America. But amid all the chaos, the grief, the suffering, Lincoln stood firm. He knew if the Union fell, then the very idea of democracy would fall with it. At first, Lincoln's only goal was to keep the Union whole. But then, he realized this war wasn't just about saving the nation. It was about redeeming its soul. January 1st, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't end slavery overnight, but it changed the meaning of the war. It transformed it from a war for power to a war for human rights. The proclamation declared all persons held as slaves in rebellious states shall now be forever free with a single signature. He turned hundreds of thousands into free people. He allowed Black Americans to join the Union Army. And most importantly, he forced the world to take a side. Britain, France. They could no longer support the South because no one wanted to stand with slavery. The war continued. The price became unbearable. Then came Gettysburg, in a quiet Pennsylvania field, after a brutal battle. Lincoln gave a speech of just 272 words. Government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. That was the moment. He turned grief into purpose. Not everyone agreed with him. Some wanted peace, no matter the cost. Others wanted to punish the South with blood. But Lincoln wanted to heal. Finally, with General Ulysses S. Grant, Lincoln achieved victory. 1865, the Civil War ended, the South surrendered, and the United States stood whole again. But he didn't stop there. He pushed through the 13th Amendment to end slavery forever in the Constitution. No more legal slaves, no more people as property, but just as the country needed him most, to rebuild, to heal. Lincoln was assassinated, April 14th, 1865, only 5 days after victory. He was shot from behind, inside Ford's theater. The entire nation went silent, not for politics, not for party, but because they knew a great soul had left the earth. He wasn't a perfect president. He hesitated. He made mistakes. But when the world needed someone to place morality above power, Abraham Lincoln stepped forward. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for people. He didn't fight to conquer the South. He fought to reunite the heart of America. He spoke softly, but always carried a big stick. Theodore Roosevelt was not born to be a president. In fact, he nearly didn't survive childhood. Born in 1858, Roosevelt was a frail child, plagued with severe asthma, a body too small, too weak, too fragile. But instead of giving up, he learned to fight back. He trained his body every day. He boxed. He rode horses. He studied animals, nature, history. He turned weakness into willpower. He turned sickness into strength. And later on, it was that blend of muscle and mind that shaped a president like no other. He started out as a New York state legislator, then police commissioner, then Navy secretary, then vice president, until 1901, when President William McKinley was assassinated. Roosevelt, just 42 years old, became the youngest president in U.S. history, and he acted immediately. Roosevelt didn't believe presidents should just manage the government. He believed they had to lead, fighting for the people, against corruption, against the powerful few. In 1902, the nation was on edge. The largest coal strike in U.S. history was underway. Winter was coming, and America was at risk of freezing. Miners demanded higher pay, shorter work days, and the right to unionize. Roosevelt did not stay silent. He summoned both coal executives and labor leaders to the White House. He negotiated, he pushed, he listened, and in the end, he became the first president to stand with the workers. He helped them reach an agreement and saved the country from a cold, deadly shutdown. Roosevelt understood a basic truth. Big business may be necessary, but it must never become a big tyrant. He launched a war on monopolies, those economic beasts that crushed competition, gouged prices, and exploited workers. Using the Sherman Antitrust Act, he filed lawsuits and broke up over 40 giant corporations, from railroads to oil, from banking to steel. And the people gave him a name: the Trust Buster, the man who shattered greedy empires and gave the market back to the people. But Roosevelt wasn't just breaking things down. He was also protecting what mattered, while the nation industrialized at breakneck speed. Forests were vanishing, rivers polluted, wildlife hunted to the brink. Roosevelt became the first president to stand up for nature, not as scenery, but as a national treasure. He protected over 150 million acres of forest, created 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, and dozens of wildlife refuges. In 1906, he signed the Antiquities Act, giving presidents the power to shield lands of scientific, historic, or ecological value. America's wealth doesn't lie in gold or silver, but in her forests, her rivers, and her wild things. And Roosevelt didn't stop there. After reading The Jungle, a shocking expose about the horrors of meatpacking, he moved fast. he signed the Meat Inspection Act, forcing all meat factories to follow sanitary standards, the Pure Food and Drug Act, banning fake medicine, toxic products, and requiring clear labels. For the first time ever, America had laws to protect its consumers. But Roosevelt's vision stretched beyond US borders. He believed America should be strong, not just at home, but on the world stage. He expanded the Navy, strengthened US presence in Latin America, and built the Panama Canal, a historic project that connected the Atlantic and Pacific, transforming global trade forever. He wasn't afraid to use military power when necessary. He called it the Big Stick policy. Speak softly, but carry a big stick. That made him a symbol of American power, but also a controversial figure, especially in Latin America, where many saw US presence as interference. Of course, Roosevelt was far from perfect. He was criticized for aggressive foreign policy, for not doing enough on racial justice, for a personality that was sometimes too bold, too brash. But whether you loved him or hated him, you could never ignore him. He stayed up late, worked relentlessly, wrote books, climbed mountains, boxed, hunted bears, raised kids. He didn't just govern, he lived the presidency. I never tried to be the greatest president. I only wanted to be the one who did the most, and he did. He lived in an age of lies, but he chose to be honest. In a country where politicians were often doubted, criticized, and bought with favors and votes, one man stood up, not to win the crowd, but to defend what was right. Even if it meant losing his entire career. His name was Grover Cleveland, born in 1837 in New Jersey. He grew up poor. His father was a preacher. No Harvard, no fancy background, no political machine behind him. From a local sheriff, to mayor, to governor of New York, and then president. When Cleveland walked into the White House in 1885, America was sinking into what they called the Gilded Age. It looked shiny on the outside, but inside, it was rotten. Corruption ruled. Politics was for sale. Laws were written for money. Offices were handed out like rewards. You support me, I give your guy a job. But Cleveland said no. Public office is a duty, not a reward. In his first term, Cleveland set a record. He vetoed over 400 bills, not to be difficult, but because he refused to sign anything that smelled like backroom deals, political favors, or appointments owed to loyalty. Many politicians were furious. Even the public was confused. But Cleveland didn't step back. One of his most famous vetoes, a relief bill to help Texas farmers hit by drought. It sounded heartless. But Cleveland explained, the federal government should not do what individuals and communities can do. Because if today we give aid for a drought, tomorrow we'll spend taxpayer money on whoever shouts the loudest. He didn't hate the poor. He feared what corruption could do to compassion. Even as a Democrat, Cleveland never blindly served his party. When Democratic leaders demanded he fire Republican workers from office, he simply said, if they're doing a good job, why should I replace them? Both parties turned against him, but the people started to trust him. After a successful first term, he lost re-election. But 4 years later, he came back. In 1893, Cleveland became the only president in U.S. history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. But his second term was pure storm. The Panic of 1893, the worst economic crash of that time. Banks collapsed, businesses closed, people lost everything. The pressure was insane. Print more money, spend your way out, buy time, buy votes, save the market. But Cleveland stood firm, and you cannot heal a wound with a lie. The economy needs time, not political painkillers. People turned on him. Stocks plunged. He was blamed for everything. But he never printed fake money just to win re-election. During a massive railroad strike, workers blocked traffic. Mail delivery stopped. Chaos spread. Cleveland sent in troops, not to crush the workers, but to protect the Constitution, the law, the mail, the right to travel. It sparked outrage, but he had no regrets. Grover Cleveland didn't have Lincoln's poetry. He didn't build highways like Eisenhower. He didn't lead a war. He didn't expand an empire, but he did something almost no leader dares to do. He turned down easy power to protect his integrity, not for himself, but for the Constitution. He didn't fight for power. He cleaned it. And that's why history remembers his name. They were not perfect, not saints, not born to be great. But when history called, they stood up. Washington, who gave up a crown to preserve a republic. Eisenhower, who redrew a nation with highways and humility. Lincoln, who led America out of its darkest hour. Roosevelt, who fought for workers, for nature, for the future. Cleveland, who chose honesty when the world chose compromise, not because they were flawless, but because they dared to act. When justice needed a defender, great leadership doesn't appear out of nowhere. It rises from unlikely places, a village, a battlefield, a courtroom, a childhood in poverty. But they all share one truth. They didn't use power to serve themselves. They used it to serve something greater, an ideal. And today, in an age of division, crisis and chaos, we still need people like them. Not those who promise the most, but those strong enough to say no when it matters most, even if it costs them everything. Greatness is not about ruling over others. It's about lifting a nation when it needs you most. So if you're watching this, tell us, who is the one US president you admire the most? And if deep down you believe that one day you can make a difference, then start today. Because history is still waiting to be written.